imagine the audience in Israel if you were to do something like that. Here are people of faith coming together for inspiration. If you are God, if you could be the Messiah, wouldn't they be thrilled to meet you? Carpathia stared at Rayford, seeming to study his eyes. Rayford believed God. He had faith that regardless of his power, regardless of his intentions, Nicolae would be impotent in the face of the 144,000 witnesses who carried the seal of Almighty God on their foreheads. If you are suggesting, Carpathia said carefully, that it only makes sense that the global community potentate bestow upon those guests a regal welcome second to none, you may have a point. Rayford had said nothing of the sort, but Carpathia heard what he wanted to hear. "Thank you," Rayford said. "Captain Steele, schedule that flight." Chapter 1. Rayford Steele worried about Mac McCullum's silence in the cockpit of Global Community 1 during the short flight from New Babylon to Tel Aviv. "Do we need to talk later?" Rayford said quietly. Mac put a finger to his lips and nodded. Rayford finished communicating with New Babylon ground and air traffic control, then reached beneath his seat for the hidden reverse intercom button. It would allow him to listen in on conversations in the Condor 216's cabin between Global Community Potentate Nicolae Carpathia, Supreme Commander Leon Fortunato, and Pontifex Maximus Peter Matthews, head of Enigma Babylon 1 World Faith. But just before Rayford depressed the button, he felt Mac's hand on his arm. Mac shook his head. Rayford shuddered. "They know?" he mouthed. Mac whispered, "Don't risk it until we talk." Rayford received the treatment he had come to expect on initial descent into Tel Aviv. The tower at David Ben-Gurion cleared other planes from the area, even those that had begun landing sequences. Rayford heard anger in the voices of other pilots as they were directed into holding patterns miles from the Condor. Per protocol, no other aircraft were to be in proximity to the Condor, despite the extraordinary air traffic expected in Israel for the meeting of the witnesses. "Take the landing, Mac," Rayford said. Mac gave a puzzled glance, but complied. Rayford was impressed at how the Holy Land had been spared damage from the Wrath of the Lamb earthquake. Other calamities had befallen the land and the people, but to Rayford, Israel was the one place that looked normal from the air since the earthquake and the subsequent judgments. Ben Gurion Airport was alive with traffic. The big planes had to land there while smaller craft could put down near Jerusalem. Worried about Mac's misgivings, still Rayford couldn't suppress a smile. Carpathia had been forced not only to allow this meeting of believers, but also to pledge his personal protection of them. Of course, he was the opposite of a man of his word, but having gone public with his assurances, he was stuck. He would have to protect even Rabbi Zion ben Judah, spiritual head of the Tribulation Force. Not long before, Dr. Ben Judah had been forced to flee his homeland under cover of night, a universal bounty on his head. Now he was back as Carpathia's avowed enemy, leader of the 144,000 witnesses and their converts. Carpathia had used the results of the most recent Trumpet Judgements to twice postpone the Israel conference, but there was no stopping it again. Just before touchdown, when everyone aboard should have been tightly strapped in, Rayford was surprised by a knock at the cockpit door. "Leon," he said, turning. "We're about to land." "Protocol, Captain," Fortunato barked. "What do you want?" "Besides that you refer to me as Supreme Commander, His Excellency asks that you remain in the cockpit after landing for orders." "We're not going to Jerusalem?" Rayford said. Mac stared straight ahead. "Precisely," Fortunato said. Much as we all know you want to be there." Rayford had been certain Carpathia's people would try to follow him to the rest of the Tribulation Force. Fortunato left and shut the door, and Rayford said, "I'll take it, Mac." Mac shifted control of the craft, and Rayford immediately exaggerated the angle of descent while depressing the reverse intercom button. He heard Carpathia and Matthews asking after Fortunato, who had clearly taken a tumble. Once the plane was parked, Fortunato burst into the cockpit. "What was that, Officer McCullum?" "My apologies, Commander," Mac said. "It was out of my hands. All due respect, sir, but you shouldn't have been out of your seat during landing." "Listen up, gentlemen," Fortunato said, kneeling between them. "His Excellency asks that you remain in Tel Aviv, as we are not certain when he might need to return to New Babylon. We have rented you rooms near the airport. GC personnel will transport you." Buck Williams sat in the bowels of Teddy Kollek Stadium in Jerusalem with his pregnant wife, Chloe. He knew she was in no way healed enough from injuries she had suffered in the Great Earthquake to have justified the flight from the United States, but she would not be dissuaded. Now she appeared weary. Her bruises and scars were fading, but Chloe still had a severe limp, and her beauty had been turned into a strange cuteness by the unique reshaping of her cheekbone and eye socket. "You need to help the others, Buck," she said. "Now go on, I'll be fine." "I wish you'd go back to the compound," he said. "I'm fine," she insisted. "I just need to sit a while. I'm worried about Hattie. I said I wouldn't leave her unless she improved or became a believer, and she's done neither." Pregnant, Hattie Durham had been left home fighting for her life against poison in her system. Dr. Floyd Charles attended her while the rest of the Tribulation Force, including new member Ken Ritz, another pilot, had made the pilgrimage to Israel. "Floyd will take good care of her." "I know. Now leave me alone a while." Rayford and Mac were instructed to wait on the plane as Carpathia, Fortunato, and Matthews were received with enthusiasm on the tarmac. Fortunato stood dutifully in the background as Matthews declined to make a public statement, but introduced Carpathia. "I cannot tell you what a pleasure it is to be back in Israel," Carpathia said with a broad smile. "I am eager to welcome the devotees of Dr. Ben-Judah and to display the openness of the global community to diverse opinion and belief. I am pleased to reaffirm my guarantee of safety to the rabbi and the thousands of visitors from all over the world. I will withhold further comment, assuming I will be welcome to address the honored assemblage within the next few days." The dignitaries were ushered to a helicopter for the hop to Jerusalem, while their respective entourages boarded an opulent motor coach. When Rayford and Mac finished post-flight checks and finally disembarked, a global community jeep delivered them to their hotel. Mac signaled Rayford not to say anything in the car or either of their rooms. In the coffee shop, Rayford finally demanded to know what was going on. Buck wished Chloe had been able to sleep on the flight from the States. Ken Ritz had procured a Gulfstream jet, so it was the most comfortable international flight Buck had ever enjoyed. But the four of them, Ken, Buck, Chloe, and Zion, had been too excited to rest. Zion spent half the time on his laptop, which Ken transmitted to a satellite, keeping the rabbi in touch with his worldwide flock of millions. A vast network of house churches had sprung up, seemingly spontaneously, with converted Jews, clearly part of the 144,000 witnesses, taking leadership positions. They taught their charges daily based on the cyberspace sermons and lessons from the prolific Ben-Judah. Tens of thousands of such clandestine local house churches, their very existence flying in the face of the all-inclusive enigma Babylon One world faith, saw courageous converts added to the church every day. Zion had been urging the local congregations to send their leaders to the great meeting of the witnesses, despite warnings from the global community. Nicolae Carpathia had again tried to cancel the gathering at the last minute, citing thousands of deaths from contaminated water in over a third of the world. Thrilling the faithful by calling Carpathia's bluff, Zion responded publicly on the Internet. "Mr. Carpathia," he had written, "we will be in Jerusalem as scheduled, with or without your approval, permission, or promised protection. The glory of the Lord will be our rear guard." Buck would need the protection almost as much as Zion. By choosing to show up and appear in public with Ben Judah, Buck was sacrificing his position as Carpathia's publishing chief and his exorbitant salary. Showing his face in proximity to the rabbis would confirm Carpathia's contention that Buck had become an active enemy of the global community. Rabbi Ben Judah himself had come up with the strategy of simply trusting God. "Stand right beside me when we get off the plane," he said. "No disguises, no misdirection, no hiding. If God can protect me, he can protect you. Let us stop playing Carpathia's games." Buck had long been anonymously broadcasting his own cyberspace magazine, The Truth, which would now be his sole writing outlet. Ironically, it attracted 10 times the largest reading audience he had ever enjoyed. He worried for his safety, of course, but more for Chloe's. Zion seemed supernaturally protected, but after this conference, the entire Tribulation Force, not to mention the 144,000 witnesses and their millions of converts, would become open arch-enemies of the Antichrist. Their lives would consist of half ministry, half survival. For all they had been through, it was as if the 7-year tribulation had just begun. They still had nearly 5 years until the glorious appearing of Christ to set up his 1,000-year reign on earth. What Zion's internet missives and Buck's underground electronic magazine had wrought in Israel was stunning. The whole of Israel crawled with tens of thousands of converted Jewish witnesses from the 12 tribes all over the world. Rather than asking Ken Ritz to find an out-of-the-way airstrip where the Tribulation Force could slip into the country unnoticed, Zion informed his audience, and also, of course, Carpathia and company, of their itinerary. Ken had landed at the tiny Jerusalem airport north of the city, and well-wishers immediately besieged the plane. A small cadre of global community armed guards, apparently Carpathia's idea of protection for Zion, would have had to open fire to get near him. The international witnesses cheered and sang and reached out to touch Zion as the Tribulation Force made its way to a van. The Israeli driver carefully picked his way through the crowd and south down the main drag toward the Holy City and the King David Hotel. There they had discovered that Supreme Commander Leon Fortunato had summarily bounced their reservations and several others by supremely commandeering the top floor for Nicolae Carpathia and his people. "I assume you have made provisions for our alternative," Zion told the desk clerk after half an hour in line. "I apologize," the young man said, slipping Zion an envelope. The rabbi glanced at Buck and pulled him away from the crowd where they opened the note. Buck looked back at Ken, who nodded to assure him he had the fragile Chloe in tow. The note was in Hebrew. "It is from Chaim," Zion said. "He writes, 'Forgive my trusted friend Nicolae for this shameful insensitivity. I have room for you and your colleagues and insist you stay with me. Page Yakov, and you will be taken care of.'" Yakov was Chaim Rosenzweig's driver and valet. He loaded their stuff into a Mercedes van and soon had the Tribulation Force installed in guest rooms at Chaim's walled and gated estate within walking distance of the old city. Buck tried to get Chloe to stay and rest while he and Ken and Zion went to the stadium. "I didn't come here to be on the sidelines," she said. "I know you're concerned about me, but let me decide what I'm up to." At Colic Stadium, Buck had been as stunned as the others.